This is NEGOTIATEx TV.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us on the NEGOTIATEx podcast. We are continuing our conversation with Samuel Dinnar, entrepreneurial negotiations expert. If you haven't already checked out part A of this show, be sure to do that first. Let's jump into the conversation with Samuel.
The importance of a trusted advisor for that entrepreneur, even when he or she has a founding team that they've surrounded themselves with. In your experience, how important is it getting that initial team right, or at least having someone you can go to, whether it's with prep or maybe it's a rehearsal, or maybe it's in this worked well, do differently. How critical is it to have that trusted advisor?
I would say do it even if you haven't found the trusted advisor or the ideal one, right? So negotiation is a team sport. A lot of people think it's you do it solo. Even if you're in the room on your own, you'd be much better off if you prepared with a buddy or with an advisor. If you debriefed with a buddy or an advisor. If you just told the story of what you're going to do, someone with a different perspective, a different style may help you rethink, and just by saying it, you may be rethinking it yourself. So find a buddy, even if you don't have a trusted advisor. Now, once you find somebody who is really at the level of they have the expertise and you trust them and they can give you feedback which you would listen to, right? Yeah. Then that's a keeper, right? Then absolutely try to keep those people engaged in your life, and especially in critical negotiations. If you're building a company and you found someone who's like your trusted advisor for negotiation, as a mentor to how it is to be a CEO, as a lawyer who can help with certain types of deals, then you keep those relationships and you build on them, but definitely use them, because that pays off significantly. We are so busy sometimes, and we are so stuck in our own single perspective, that having one or two other people prepare with us already opens our mind into other perspective, even if their advice may not be something I want to listen to at the end, right? So I may be preparing with both of you, and you both have different opinions of what I should do when I walk into the room. And having that discussion is already valuable, because we don't know what's going to happen when I go into that room, and I'm going to have to make my own decision whether I adopt your advice or come up with something of my own. But by thinking about these different scenarios, I've already done a lot of prep work.
Samuel, a related question. Are there times when an entrepreneur is forced to, or at least might consider, using an agent and working through someone else for whatever that conversation is needs to happen? And if so, what are some considerations about being really intentional when working through someone else?
Let me break that down into three parts. Why use an agent? What are the advantages and disadvantages of using one? How to do so? And then what is your relationship with the agent? So we use agents a lot of time when they have the expertise or the resources that we don't have, right? They're a certified lawyer. They can appear in court. They actually know the local real estate market, right? We don't know. We just moved here. So we use an agent there, or they can spend now 100 hours doing this work. Well, I can't. I can only spend 10 hours on this in the following week. So I need someone to do most of the legwork and represent me. Those are the reasons we use agents, and as well as separate my relationship directly from the other side. So if, sports agents, they can negotiate really, really hard with a certain sports team about salary and terms and all sorts of things. But when the athlete shows up, they don't have any baggage of that hard negotiation. The athlete shows up and he's like, I'm here to play. I'm everybody's friend. That relationship wasn't damaged because it was, hard negotiations happening on the salary. So, and vice versa. If the relationship is tense, you may send an agent who's, calmer and doesn't have the emotional baggage to ease up the channel and open it with the agent of the other side. So that's why we use agents. What do we need to be careful? Is we don't know sometimes what really happens in the room. We're dependent on their reporting. Right. We don't know how much hours they've actually put in or not. We don't know their strategy. So we have to be thinking of going into the room. What are we, authorizing them to do or not on our behalf in the room, right? For example, I may say in this meeting, I don't expect you to even put offers on the table. I expect you to negotiate the process and do this and do that. Well, if they ask me what your bottom line is, I need to tell them, well, no, this meeting is not my bottom line. It's not about the deal itself. It's about how do we get to a deal? And we'll talk about that later. See what they say, see what, right? So you can build it stage-wise with that. And the third thing is, remember that there is a negotiation between you and that agent all the time, right? In some places it's fixed, the same way a dress price is fixed in a store with a ticket price, right? It's done so that we don't negotiate the price of the dress, right? You may still try. Well, I don't know if I can afford it. Isn't there a discount you could find me somehow? Well, are you a member of this or that, right? So same way as, realtors, and this is now in the news because of, they're trying to fix. No, we always get this percentage. Well, what's negotiable? What's not negotiable? How many hours are you going to put in for that percentage, right? Because sometimes there are conflicts of interest, and we have to pay attention to that and incorporate that into our discussion. It's a negotiation. For example, if I'm selling a house, I'm really interested in a higher price. My agent is really interested in a higher price. The buyer is interested in paying less. If the buyer's agent gets a commission based on the price, how motivated are they for a little discount in the price versus closing the deal, right? So we have to pay attention to those kinds of conflicts of interest and expressively negotiate them.
So you've mentioned process more than once now.
Yeah.
In my opinion, is process design and management are absolutely critical to an effective negotiation, and they rarely get the attention they should. We skip over this idea of process management. So how should entrepreneurs approach taking ownership of their negotiation process?
This is really key. So I think one of the things that I try to instill in people is that you have a say about the process, and you can show process leadership, right? For example, one thing I call NYPON, negotiate your process of negotiation. At the beginning of a negotiation, how are we going to negotiate, right? A lot of times people walk in and they don't talk about what is the process. They don't even talk about basic things like, well, how long is our meeting? What are we trying to accomplish in this one versus the next one? How are we going to allocate, we have 2 hours. How are we going to divide these 2 hours? What are we going to try and do in each of them? So these are all explicit things you can negotiate, which would later avoid surprises. For example, negotiate why and how you're going to call for breaks in the negotiation. Agree ahead of time. And then that sets the norm and the expectation and the process around how we call for breaks. And they don't get alarmed if you say, well, I think we need a 10-minute break to consult. It's like, no, I told you in the beginning that every hour or two, we would want a 10-minute break to just touch base within my team. And if that's okay with you, we'll call a break and we'll go and caucus and we'll come back. Hopefully you can do the same, but that's part of our process. Is that okay with you, right?
Right.
And by negotiating the process, you're establishing a few very important things. You're getting people to agree on something already, right? You're modeling agreement, and you're aligning expectations. And I have this thing that I call, which is align, solve, and realign. I try to think of every meeting or every negotiation, start with align. Right? Let's align ourselves. What are we trying to do? Frame it as joint problem solving, negotiate our process, then get into the different stages of how we solve the problem, and leave time at the end to realign. A lot of times people don't leave time at the end. And then they run up to the clock and, oh, we're running out of time. I have to go. They shut the Zoom off, or they walk out of the room and you're like, wait, what's the next step? Who's going to call whom and do what? Are we allowed to talk to our peers about what we accomplished? So I would always negotiate, let's plan to end at 3:45 and leave the last 15 minutes to talk about aligning again on what we accomplished, what the next steps are, and how we communicate to our back tables what we've done here. Is that okay with you? And now we know, okay, we're going to start with introductions. We're going to go to you telling your perspective, and I'll ask some questions. I'll tell you my perspective, you ask some questions. We'll try to chart out the main interests, try to come up with options. If we run out of time, we're going to have a hard stop here, and we're going to continue in the afternoon. Is that okay with you? Right? Yeah, that sounds logical to me, but I would rather go first. Okay, then fine. Why don't you start, and I'll go second. All right. Right? So we've just negotiated our process of negotiation, and it sets a much better tone moving in.
Yeah,
so,
love it.
And then you increase your awareness, and if you need to change it during the negotiation, you just pause and you say, hey, I think this isn't productive. Let's change our process a little bit. Let's move to something else.
Right. But if I didn't set it up to start with, I've got nothing to change from or pull us back to. So really, love how you laid that out.
Sammy, what do you see as specific obstacles or biases around gender and culture when it comes to entrepreneurial negotiation? And how do you advise best handling these challenges?
Yeah. So, it's amazing. I wrote this book and I knew this, but when I started researching it, and for me, it was very important to interview a diversity of entrepreneurs. And the first list that I got off the entrepreneurship circles at MIT of entrepreneurs to talk to were very dominantly male, very dominantly white. And so I expanded, and you can see in the book, there's a lot more diversity. And we went into other domains and got more diversity. And this issue of gender and culture was really important in two aspects. One, if you look at the VC, world, about 5% of the deals are to women-led entrepreneurs, only 2% of the money. So it's less deals and smaller deals. And that's because of just historically the networking circles, the boys club, the whatever, the biases that exists. And the challenges are in how do you break in to these circles? How do you then get the investment decision to be fair? And then how do you get the support, which is another issue? Once the investment is made, how do you then get the board support and the BC support to continue? So I researched that and found that there are biases out there that are perpetuated, and if you learn and know about them, then you can overcome them somehow, or set up a process, or bring more players to the table to overcome. I'll give you maybe an example. They found through analyzing the questions of similar entrepreneurs' situations, but once it's a male and once it's a female, that 2/3 of the questions for the males were like upside questions. How are you gonna be the number one in the market? How are you going to make sure that this thing gets approved by this date, right? Whereas 2/3 of the questions to the female CEOs were, well, how are you going to protect against being late to the market? They were like downside framed questions. How are you going to make sure the quality is going to be good enough so that people don't blah, blah, blah? They were more about risk and about avoiding failure. And the interesting twist is when they dug deeper, most people tend to answer the question they were asked. So if I asked you, how are you going to guarantee you're going to be number one? You're going to say, I'm going to guarantee being number one because so and so and so. And if I ask you, how are you going to guarantee you're not going to be late to the market? And, number 3 is not going to have any market left. And you're going to say, well, I'm going to try and protect against being late to the market by doing this. But those who flipped the question, even though they were asked a downside question, answered an upside question, were 10 times more successful in the money that they raised in the end. So how are you going to make sure you're not late to the market? Well, the reason we're going to be number one in the market is because we're going to do this and this and this. And again, this will trigger some other biases, but it's worked in theory, in the lab. and in practice, people have seen this. And so biases are a funny thing because sometimes, people tend to fulfill the prophecy and reinforce them, and sometimes not. There was another study example. Asian women, before they were taken the test, were told, usually women score lower on this test, and they averaged lower. And the same kind of group of people were told, usually Asians score higher on these tests. And lo and behold, they scored a little higher than average on that test. But what I found most interesting is that when people were told what I just said, which is that whatever I tell you before the test is going to bias your performance, because if I tell you this and this, then that neutralized the effect. So sometimes, and there are more examples in the book like that make you think, and some practical tips on how to use it, in that you're going to be able to overcome the bias. You're not going to change the people at the other side of the table.
Right.
But you may be able to change a little bit the tone. And sometimes you have to realize, okay, I have to change the people at the table. I'm trying to change the process. I'm trying to change the game and name the game, but maybe I need to change the people. And I've had one female CEO who, for a particular investor, would always show up with her male vice president because it just made things better. And they had this thing worked out. Whereas if the question was directed at the vice president instead of the president, and it should be the president should be answering that, the VP was very nonchalant about saying, oh, that's a great question. Why don't I let her answer because she's been leading this effort, and hand it back to the CEO. So you find ways of dealing with it. But yeah, it is an important thing. And I gave gender examples, but they're true for any other outside group or disadvantaged group in certain settings. Don't be discouraged. It's part of the landscape. If you get triggered because it's unfair, you may perform suboptimally. If you are able to recognize it and work with it, you may be able to actually turn it to be a good thing.
So Samuel, another real life example here from one of my former students.
Sure.
Who took my negotiations course, did an amazing job through the course. Chris Moats, he's a co-founder of Team Up Therapy. It's a virtual speech therapy clinic. And he shared the following with me. So Chris often faces the challenge of negotiating with giant insurance companies that operate on a very structured formulaic basis. These insurance companies tend to offer standardized reimbursement rates based on specific services and geographic locations. The Team Up Therapy Clinic is unique. They have an innovative virtual delivery model with extra emphasis on parent coaching. But to the insurance company, they're just one of countless providers applying to join their network. Yeah. Given the size and more rigid procedures of these insurance companies compared to Chris's small startup, what strategies would you recommend to get the insurance companies out of the formula mindset?
In this industry and with startups, very typical situation. So, Chris, that's a great question. I would encourage us to think in what my colleagues Sabanius and Lax call three-dimensional negotiation. Is realize, like I said earlier, the negotiation doesn't start when you enter the room to negotiate the terms. It starts way before that, right? It's a campaign of a series of things engagements you have to do. So map out that organization. Try to find out who the decision makers, who the influencers are, who could be your champions, who the blockers would be. When you find that champion or potential influencer, give them what they need in order to stress your unique value. And that's the story. The story is about your unique value and why they need this. And why, even though you're a small company, you're better than this other big company solution that they have. And why the urgency is there, why they need it now, right? So this goes well before they actually get to the cycle of the year where they have to say, okay, we have to sign the vendors for next year, bring them in, right? The other thing is know your value and then learn to say no in the right way, which is, you know, this little no kind of sandwich, which is, no, I can't live up to your 300-page terms and conditions document. I'm a small startup. I could never do that. And I had an example of dealing with a big Asian company that way. This is, you know, a very, very large contract. They put out a request for proposal with their terms and conditions and sent it out. But these were terms and conditions that were suited for big aerospace in Asia. They definitely weren't suited for a startup in the US.
Right.
And my decision, and it required a lot of internal negotiation on how we would do this, was to put a response, a very thick response that says, yes, we want to work with you. Our solution is the best solution for what you need, and here is how it answers all your questions. Unfortunately, we cannot work under the terms and conditions that you sent us. But yes, here are revised, simpler terms in only a 10-page document where we could work together. If this is good for you, we would love to continue talking. Now you can imagine I was really stressed out when they went away for 3 months and looked at all our competitors. But then when they came back, I knew we had a deal because they had done their due diligence and they realized what they were asking for was unrealistic and they couldn't have a solution. So you have to take that risk sometime and realize I can't work under these terms and these conditions. But use that opportunity to educate them and show them how you could actually work, how they could actually get this benefit.
Chris also shared that anytime there's a negotiation, it can take several months.
Yep.
Chris and his team want to move more quickly so they can grow. The insurance companies don't feel that same urgency. Chris shared it's very tempting to accept their current offer, come back to the table to negotiate after a year of proving the team up therapy's value. That way they can move faster and have more legitimacy through proof of concept. So his question is this, is that a crazy strategy? And would it be better than attempting a lengthy negotiation up front that may feel like it's less likely to succeed, but more focused on the terms they're trying to achieve?
Yeah, it's a great dilemma. And there is no textbook answer, right? I mean, it really depends on the situation and what Chris's power in negotiation comes from his own alternatives, right? If this is the only insurance company in the state and he has to get them, then he's got this dilemma. If he has other alternatives, he could have more power at the table because he could focus his time on working someone else. So he has to make that decision per the particular case and the situations. I would caution against two things. I would caution against undervaluing your own value, because one of the key elements in negotiation is objective standards. And once you've set a value to something, it's going to be very hard next year to go double the price. So, you know, if you say, yeah, we could do it for half the price, then that gets set as a precedent and it's very difficult. So try to think of ways of keeping your value high, keeping the objective standard high, and finding other ways to reduce the actual dollar maybe by treating it something else, calling it something else, right? Why don't you buy it from us at full price, but then we'll buy from you something to, you know, hours of support or whatever, right? Try to structure the deal. Money has different names, right? And Chris definitely has a motivation to not lower the value of what he's proposing just because the other side has a process and a structure of being difficult. They're built that way. If you think why procurement organizations are built the way they are and why their people are only incentivized on a % reduction versus last year, then you're not going to get past them because all they get measured is by what kind of discount can you give me? And when I come or Chris comes with 3 new features, they're going to say, I don't care about new features. I only get measured on the reduction in price. So you need the person on the back table his marketing department or his engineers to say, yes, we really want those 3 features. And those 3 features cost, 20% increase. So think about those other dimensions and how you can get past the particular negotiator you're facing, and without alienating them, obviously, but creating other people who could be your champions or influencers, or at least back up your claim that, your people need this by next month. Go ask them, right? I remember a case, and Chris may like this, where this one entrepreneur gave 4 units free to affiliates of the company he was targeting, right? And so by the time they had their internal discussion and they called up the other people, they said, yeah, we know this company. We actually have a free unit on trial here. But he wouldn't give a free one to the actual company he was trying to sell, because he wanted them to pay for the trials and then buy the products. So he was willing, to, work different deals, but he knew that word would get out that this other company is using it, this other company is using it. That really started getting some tractions. So again, it's a campaign. It's not just this one negotiation or one meeting.
As we wrap up, we acknowledge there's so much more we could explore on this topic. If there was one thing we didn't ask you that an inspiring entrepreneur should know about negotiations, what is it?
I want to bring it back to it's not that complicated. There are many moving parts, but we are all negotiators, right? We all negotiate since the age of 2 and constantly. And we've all created some bad habits. And a lot of times what got us here is not what's going to get us to the next level. So we need to evolve. We need to be more conscious about the theory and practice of negotiation, about our own self as negotiators, and gradually move ourselves in the right direction. It's not going to be overnight, but the reward is there fairly quickly. Negotiation classes are experiential. You try simulations, you do them. And the real learning goes when you try to apply some of those skills in real life. And I would probably, if I had the one important tip, I would say keep a journal, a logbook of your negotiations. Occasionally jot down, had this negotiation with this about this topic, worked well, this, do differently this, focus on this next time, move on. And then together with, as Ram said, getting a buddy or a mentor, that will do the trick. So we talked about some of it, but don't let the fact that you don't have time to read the books or take the courses stop you from starting to make incremental process with yourself.
Well, Samuel, I love that you said keep a journal or a logbook. That's something, again, probably all of us that teach this have our students do. It is so critical. So thanks for ending on that note. Thank you for everything you shared. What an interesting conversation. Learned so much and just really did enjoy your book. So again, thanks for taking the time to be with us. It was a marvelous chat.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. And this is a fun podcast. I look forward to being in touch and helping your students in other ways in the future if possible. So good luck.
Absolutely. Thanks, Samuel. And that is it for us on today's podcast. If you haven't already, please rate, review, and subscribe to the NEGOTIATEx podcast, and we'll see you in the next episode. Hey, thanks for checking out this video on NEGOTIATEx TV. If you found any value at all, please hit the subscribe button, hit the notification icon if you want to be notified of future videos. And then we also have a couple videos over here that you might be interested in checking out. If you and your small business, your team are looking to get negotiations or leadership training, then you can head over to NEGOTIATEx.com and learn more about the coaching services we offer. Thanks, and I'll see you over in the next video.